Good morning. So today we're going to do some squats and we're going to talk a little bit about exercise selection. So the first thing we're going to talk about is that there's like kind of two camps or two extremes. And one is like the just do these movements, and that might be like a squat, bench, deadlift type person, and everything will be fine. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum where everything matters, every little detail matters. That might be, somebody who's often they're training as functional, whatever that word may mean at this point. But we have the nothing matters camp and the everything matters camp. And usually we want to be thinking somewhere in between those two camps. So individual variation does matter, but oftentimes not as much as the people over here would like to think. And they could do a little bit better if they thought a little bit more like the people over here, and vice versa. But the basic rules that I'll use as a rough paraphrasing of Mark Rippetoe or rough translation, or my take on it is, we want to pick movements that A, use a lot of muscle mass, B, are very conducive to increasing load, and C, go through a effective range of motion, right? Now, that for Rip, I know that led to a lot of like, okay, we're gonna do low bar back squat, we're gonna deadlift, we're gonna bench press, we're gonna overhead press. All great movements, but they don't need to be the movements. There's nothing in the human genome that says, hey, you have to be really good at these very specific variations of larger movement patterns. And so it's a better idea to figure out a sort of squat that works for you, a sort of hinge that works for you, a sort of press that works for you, a sort of pull that works for you. In my case, right now, we're working on high bar back squats while wearing weightlifting shoes. And this is to take this movement that, yes, works a lot of muscle mass, yes, goes through an effective range of motion, yes, is conducive to loading, but it might not be conducive to the most loading, such as a low bar squat would be. And my quads are my weak point, and when I'm wearing the weightlifting shoes, very specifically, I am aiming at strengthening my quads. So in this case, it's not conducive necessarily to the heaviest loading, but it is conducive to loading what I'm trying to load. But if you use these big rules, then you will have good general adaptations that are very global. And like, so the everything matters camp over here often are not doing enough global adaptation. Camp over here might be a little too focused on it. But the biggest thing when we're looking at your strength exercises, your primary strength exercises, this doesn't include work you do outside of the gym, sprinting, plyometrics, throwing, et cetera. It doesn't include your accessory work. It doesn't include stretches. I'm just talking about your primary strength work. These are the rules. But once again, there needs to be room for some individual variation. So this largely came about because over the weekend, I was working with my buddy Derek. Derek is very, very tall. He's 6'5", and a lot of very tall lifters have a hard time back squatting. And while at some point, maybe we do have him back squatting, I just said, hey, I'm gonna try 3 variations of squatting. I think front squat will be the one that you like the most based on your build. And we tried low bar, we tried high bar, we tried front squat. And sure enough, front squat was the one that he liked the most. Doesn't mean he can't do the other ones, but he's better off getting good at squatting, using that variation that he feels is a lot more natural, right? It's not conducive to the single most load, but like, you're not gonna get weaker doing front squats. You're gonna have really strong quads, you're really strong midsection, you're gonna have a really strong upper back, just from front squats. And because we were doing so much bias on his anterior chain with the front squats, it made a lot of sense that his hinge ended up being the Romanian deadlift, which is going to give a little bit of extra focus to his glutes and hamstrings, where he might be missing it from a squat variation. So he's still getting a very large global adaptation between those two. His upper body stuff he does at home. It's a lot easier to do upper body stuff at home than it is to do lower body stuff. We talk about that rule of being conducive to loading. Oftentimes body weight's not enough, and it's not that there's not things that you can do to make your body weight feel much heavier, create much greater tension. But like, just from a simplistic point of view, where we can just load it very easily, barbell is king. Kettlebells are great. You're not likely to have 315 pounds worth of kettlebells. You are very likely to be able to put 405 on a barbell. So you can always load it very progressively. Oftentimes there's kind of this talk about like unilateral versus bilateral and what's more efficient and what's more functional. And my take on it is that exercises are usually closer to other exercises than they are to functional everyday life. Like, lunges are probably not more functional for runners than squats, just because you're spending time on one leg. I would say the real function there is spending the time on one leg in your sport, in sprinting, in jumping. Those things are much more like a sport than your strength training. And so, not that you can't do lunges, I think lunges are fantastic. But the benefit isn't that they're more functional because they're on one leg. The benefit is because they're going to bias different tissues, they're going to bias different ranges than your squats. So you're just getting a different stimulus. And yes, if you do them right, then you can load them very, very heavy. Especially if you do something like a Smith machine, you can put on quite a bit of weight in there. So those are just some of my basic thoughts on exercise selection. I have a client here, surprisingly a minute early, and all right, and we're gonna get to work.